Full disclosure, the voice you are listening to now is artificially generated, brought to you by satisphonic.com. See the link in the description for more details. What American city has fallen the furthest in the last 5 years? Jackson, Mississippi. The murder rate is literally unbelievable, and the decay of the city and basic amenities is really tragic. Easily the worst place I've ever been in my entire life. It is crazy to me that that is the capital of the state and all of the politicians have to drive through there and witness it. The entire area around the Capitol building is completely dead and there are homeless people everywhere. Everything is dilapidated and dirty. All of the politicians have to drive through there and witness it. Oh, that's the fun thing. Our politicians don't even go there. Our governor even joked about being glad they didn't need to go to Jackson during its water crisis last year. Mississippi is literally a giant financial crime disguised as a state. Its government has robbed it blind and left it to rot. They see how bad things are. They see how bad things are. They know they don't give a fuck because it gets them paid. If an Shredder thinks this is the worst place, then it must be so. I was like, surely this man is exaggerating. But no. 878,100,000. That'd be insanity, even for Brazil. For comparison, Bahia is the city in Brazil with the highest murder rate. It's 888. Why is it that high? Are these murders related to gang crime or something? Or is it just random? I drive through once. I will never go back again. Even driving was a challenge due to the streets being more of a complication of potholes and not street. I have literally never heard a good thing about Mississippi law. Not a big city, but I drove through Meridian, Mrs. after several years, and the decay was really shocking. Everything seemed shuttered and dead except Walmart. And there you have the answer of the #1 killer of small-town America, Walmart. Turns out that if you take all of the money out of a town and send it to Bentonville, that you own local economy doesn't do too well. If your town is too small for a Walmart, Dollar General will gladly handle this service for you. Walmart is the reason for the decay. They often get tax breaks for setting up shop in rural communities. Then they put all other businesses out of business by selling products made overseas at prices lower than the smaller stores can even buy them at. I was like, surely this man is exaggerating. But no, 878,100,000. That'd be insanity even for Brazil. For comparison, Bahia is the city in Brazil with the highest murder rate. It's 880. I just wanted to say, I'm from Detroit and I'm really proud of my city for how it's bouncing back recently. Yes, I recently moved to Detroit from the Northeast and I really love it here. Compared to the rest of the country, it's relatively affordable and the quality of life is great. Was shockingly surprised because everybody always said how bad Detroit was, but that is definitely not the case here anymore. I am very happy here overall. In general, I think the big cities around Lake Erie are wildly underrated. Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Detroit are all solid places to live with low cost of living and high quality of life and access to urban amenity. Got to deal with snow cold for several months, but that's the trade-off for affording a nice house. Hearing about these makes me appreciate the progress Detroit has made in the last 5-10 years. The Motor City is getting better every day. I was shocked when I visited Detroit last May. It's been 15 years since I last visited, and wow, what an improvement. As a native Michigander, this makes me so happy. I've always loved Detroit, and I'm glad to see others are starting to see the good there as well. It's definitely come a long way from where it was 15 years ago. I mean, I went back to my old neighborhood on the east side recently, and it's still barren houses for blocks and blocks. Downtown looked a ton better though. It's pretty simple. It's affordable for artists and creatives. Whenever a city has an affordable lifestyle for artists and creatives, they go there, things get nicer, people thrive. Whenever a place like Portland that used to be that way gets more expensive and it pushes the artists out and makes the average guy that used to be able to work a shitty job and get by suddenly homeless without any prospect of improvement, and they do more drugs and start to throw filth everywhere and crime goes up. If we make housing and basic living affordable for creatives and marginalized people, it's almost always a nicer place to live. Austin was like that for musicians, but the last decade has seen so much tech growth and money, it's deaf on the other side of that hill going down. New Orleans. Our current mayor is blatantly corrupt and open about it. She's been caught misusing public funds and banging one of her security officers on city time and on city dime. She took absolutely no accountability during the pandemic, despite enforcing outrageous COVID restrictions that she herself never followed. Our infrastructure is crumbling. We had the Hard Rock Hotel collapse during construction, killing 3 workers and injuring 20. It took 2 years to demo that building and retrieve the bodies. When trying to demo the construction crane, they used a controlled explosion which catastrophically failed and caused the crane arm to swing, potentially killing hundreds in the immediate area, despite being in a closed-off area. Luckily, it didn't break off, which it was supposed to do, because that's what the demolition was supposed to accomplish. This added to the over 2 years it took to demo the site. Our public transportation system is becoming more scarce, with fewer streetcar routes, fewer bus routes, and longer wait times for public transit. Average police response time is anywhere from 4 to 9 hours, as there is no reported injuries, and 35 to 50 minutes for violent crime or reported injuries. Violent crime is the worst it's been since before Katrina, and the housing market is outrageous despite the properties falling apart. The job market is abysmal, and no reputable companies want to operate in the city. New Orleans is actually what people picture when they think of Detroit. The Hard Rock thing blows my mind. Last time I was there, I asked our Uber driver why they still hadn't cleaned all of that up. It wouldn't be that big of a deal, but one body is still stuck up there. You can see his legs dangling over the edge. Last March, some drunk-eyed tourist broke into my parents' house in the middle of the day while I was home. I called 911 while he was in the process of kicking down the door, and I got put on hold. When the operator answered, they had me hang up and said to call back if anything else happened. He ended up getting in. I fled out the back. Police did come, but calling 911 and no one answering was jarring. A friend who lives in No tells me not to think of it as a badly run city. Think of it more as a decently run Caribbean city. Apparently it's Houston, which has been averaging a subsidence of 17 millimeters a year. Huts, Washington Post, Climate, Environment 20 million, 230,000, 530,530 land sinking. Subsidence. Sea level parts of the city have fallen up to 3 meters since 1917. And here I was thinking, oh good, no one's mentioned my city yet, but only because we're actually sinking. That's okay then. No, it's not okay. It's tech. The answer is Davenport. Aya, but no one gives a shit about it, including the elected officials of Davenport. Aya. Allowing buildings to deteriorate to the point of random collapsing in that town didn't help either. It shows what little the elected officials show of concerns of the health, safety, and welfare of its citizens. Oakland looked like it was on the path to bigger and better things before the pandemic. A few tech companies moved headquarters there, and more were looking to move. Urban renewal looked like a real possibility. Then the pandemic hit and undid all the progress and then some. Parts of Oakland feel lawless. 911 does not respond, and criminals walk from car to car, breaking windows in broad daylight. The local government seems utterly incompetent. Really sad situation for everyone living here. Moving out of Oakland at the end of this month, after living here my whole life, partially for personal reasons, but largely because the city has gone to shit while getting even more expensive than before. Charleston. Its population has steadily declined by an average of about 1.5% per year for over 2 decades. It's the only state capital in the US is dying. Jackson, Mrs., would like a turn. Yeah, I visited Jackson recently, and I was shocked. The water was not safe to drink. Most of the former downtown is boarded up, and everyone who could move out is gone. I take Uber when I travel for work, and I have never been warned so strongly to stay out of the city. Every Uber driver, black, white, old, young, male, female, every single one told me to set up my meetings outside the city. I see you've never visited Harrisburg. As someone who has been to both, I'd still take Harrisburg in a second over Charleston. None of you'll know the right answer because it's Memphis, Tennessee. For the first time in generations, a few years ago, Memphis was doing good. Now, where to start? About a year ago, the I-40 bridge has a giant crack in one of the sides because the inspector was afraid of height. This bridge goes over the Mississippi and has hundreds of thousands of people going over daily. People fucking around with a drone are the only reason we found out about it. Teps, WMB News, Comnusus, News Inspector who failed catch Mississippi River Bridge, crack fired. None 1,267,723 just last month. Over 500,000 people lost power multiple times for multiple days in a row. Why? It rained. It wasn't a tornado. It wasn't a flood. It was just 4 or 5 consecutive heavy rains. I was without power for nearly 15 of the 31 days last month. Can't drink the water because the pipes keep bursting during the winter and it causes sewage to back up into it. But that's not bad enough because the power keeps fucking going out. The diesel generators running the pumping stations have been overused and started to leak into the groundwater, meaning gasoline is now in our drinking water. Rip Tire Nichols. I can keep going too. Dude shot a doctor in his office like a month ago. We still don't know why. This city is absolutely fucked and it does not look like it's going to turn around. Also, we're the most dangerous city to live in America now. 237% higher than the national average. Fuck. Damn. I didn't realize Memphis was that fucked up. Memphis is another one of those towns that's always been fucked up. I was there 20 years ago. I'm from the South. I never really saw true racism until I got to Memphis. Holy shit, the white-black divide was crazy. Lived in South Haven, Mrs. 20 years ago when I worked in Helena. It is the one place I've lived that you could not pay me enough to return to. Don't worry, at least it's not my state capital of Trenton, NJ, the worst state capital in the US. I'm a state worker, so I had to move closer, but everything is so spread out, ghetto and dead in the area. All the local housing in good areas are uber expensive because of proximity to Princeton, and we are not allowed to move to Princeton. I knew somebody was gonna say Memphis, and I have to say, you're right. I've lived here all my life, and I've seen it gone to shit day after day in the last few years. I'm one of those people who defend Memphis up and down, but I'm also not afraid to call out when my city is doing poorly, unlike many people I know who will pretend nothing's wrong, or will just say just Memphis being Memphis. Being Memphis. They'll also talk about how every other city is just as bad and has similar problems, as a way of normalizing worsening tropes in cities or just to distract themselves from the reality of how horrible Memphis has got. Being in denial is but one of many issues we have in the city. In the last year or so we've had the Eliza Fletcher incident, the Tyre Nichols incident, the Zeke incident, rise in carjackings, criminals being out of prison the next day, and I can keep going. I love this city, but at the same time I hate the direction that it's going because nothing's changing to make things better. Some of us have too much pride to call out the issues this city has. We need to take an honest look at ourselves and see that we are also adding to the problem of the city if we are refusing to see what's wrong with it. Porny got so bad that they don't even show it on TV anymore. At least they didn't go bankrupt like those losers in Eagleton. San Francisco. Born and raised there, I've never seen it like this. People are leaving notes in the windows, begging thieves not to break their windows. A co-worker took the tint off his windows so they can see he doesn't have anything. They busted his windows, took his 49-year bobblehead that was on his dashboard. I was told to just never lock your car doors in New Orleans. They're breaking in regardless, so just leave it unlocked so you don't have to replace a window. I read and hear a comment from a guy living in Seth who did this, but found 3 homeless people in his car the next morning. Seems like you just can't win. Thankfully, F-Shack, Dirty Mike and the boys. Steve here. It's true. The unlock your car technique isn't worthwhile because it's very common for people to just chill in your car and use it as their personal dorm for the night. I used to work as a public defender. I had a client who got caught smashing windows at a mechanic shop to steal from the cars left overnight. He got caught, took a guilty plea, placed on probation with no jail time. Mechanic and his insurance were on the hook for the broken windows. The mechanic ended up deciding to leave the doors unlocked, and the same guy, while still on probation for the first offense, just started sleeping and doing other things in the cars overnight, smoking, drinking, using the bathroom, etc. He got caught again, took a guilty plea, again no jail time, just probation. The mechanic ended up being on the hook to cover the costs associated with damage and the mess left behind in the car. The mechanic decided to spend a bunch of money to expand out the fence to cover the whole property, including barbed wire around the top of the fence. No problem. The guy, while still on probation for the first 2 offenses, just used a crow break-in again, smashed a few windows and slept in an unlocked car, leaving a similar mess behind. The guy got put on probation once again. The mechanic was once again on the hook for the damage. The insurance companies decided to raise the rates on the mechanic because of all his claims. He was ultimately left with no choice but to sell the property and close up the business he had spent about 20 years building. And despite all of it, the guy who was causing all the problems and expenses did not spend more than 2 consecutive days in jail for any of it. I hate to say that some people need to be incarcerated, but the lack of penalties or repercussions for repeat non-violent offenders really needs to be addressed. I left the doors of my rental unlocked in self with 0 inside the car. Still got a busted window. They laid the seat down to look in the truck, which was empty. Yeah, but then Dirty Mike and the boys get in there. I grew up in the Bay Area and watched San Francisco's gradual decline into a dystopian city of inequality. The change is insane. This is a long story. Sometimes I can't believe it really happened. But it did. 22 years ago, I was on my honeymoon, double my husband. We were staying at a hotel in the Tenderloin. We were constantly being asked for money by homeless people during the day. We didn't think too much of it. It was more than we experienced in our own city, but we just chalked it up to the temperate climate of San Francisco, where it is easier to survive than a colder climate. All cities have their streets you probably should stay away from. We weren't thinking about that when we were walking back from a club to our hotel late at night. It was not as good an idea as we thought it was. We probably should have paid for a cab, but it was a nice night out, not too long of a walk. We started getting followed by a big guy. Then it turned into 23 more men following us. I tried not to look back because I was scared. I wanted to look for an escape ahead if needed. I was not dressed modestly. It felt like we were about to get jumped. We walked past another group of men, all dressed in hoodies, gathered in the alcove of a building. From this group of men emerged a gentleman dressed head to toe in white. Not a speck of dust on him. He was dressed like a pimp. He approached me, said, "Hey, baby, what you doing out this late?" He started walking next to us. I explained to him that we were on our honeymoon. We had taken a turn down the wrong street, apparently. He was all bravado, saying his name was Diamond because I'm a girl's best friend. He kept saying how good I looked and then whispered to us that you know what I'm doing, right? Helping us out of the situation. We agreed. I continued talking with him while he walked us back to our hotel. We were still being followed this whole time by the people who were originally following us. His crew was following them. Other people joined the group following us after coming up to us. Diamond would yell at them, "You leave these nice people alone." When we got a block from the hotel, my husband said he was going to give Diamond cash for helping us, but Diamond said no. Then he told us to run to the hotel. We did. He ran at the group of men. To this very day, I am grateful for Diamond. Things could have gone very badly for us. He was there at the wrong place at the right time. I hope he is still out there somewhere, being a literal white knight pimp. I am sad to hear the Bay Area has gotten worse over the years. It is a beautiful city, but it was even a depressing place 22 years ago. A vigilante pimp, Godspeed Diamond. All the cities across the US have most of the same issues: declining tax revenue, rising homeless population, exploding drug addiction rates, and wild spending to fix the last 2 issues. These issues have been building for decades and will take decades to fix. Cities are spending money to solve a national issue. This comes at the detriment of city services that people rely on. Strong Towns has been talking for 10 years about how urban sprawl creates massive infrastructure liabilities that low-density development doesn't generate the tax base to support. The only reason cities have stayed solvent is due to new investment from continuous growth, which has allowed them to kick the can down the road for decades. But cities can't grow forever once the population levels of the House of Cards comes crashing down. The pandemic was just the catalyst for this in some major cities, but it will eventually happen everywhere if we keep building our cities the way we do. You're all missing the answer. It's New Orleans, hands down. Dwindling tax base is exasperating, a lack of police and collapsing infrastructure. Civic corruption and crime are at all-time highs, causing even more attrition. In about 20 years, it won't even be the biggest city in the state. I've lived in New Orleans for 10 years, and it's been kinda shitty the whole time I've been here. But there was a certain charm to the shittiness, and it was affordable. That has definitely changed in the last 5 years, though. It's no longer affordable, and all the artists and people who made the city interesting can't live here anymore. This summer has been so fucking brutal that I really want to get the fuck out, but I'm stuck here another 4 years. Chicago is doing fairly well, all things considered, but many of the other cities in the state of Illinois are on track to suffer the same fate as Gary, Indiana. Chicago has the advantage of scale and a highly educated labor force, so companies are willing to deal with the high property taxes in Illinois to be in proximity to Chicago. Other cities in the state, like Bloomington, Rockford, Springfield, and Decatur, don't have these same advantages, so companies looking to open a plant, mainly manufacturing food processing, have no reason to choose them over comparable places with lower taxes like Indiana and Iowa. This has led to massive population loss and increases in crime basically everywhere that isn't a college town. When you hear about Illinois suffering a massive exodus, it's from places like this downstate, not Chicago. Bloomington is fine. It's a college town with State Farm insurance, and they recently revived the auto manufacturing facility with Rivian. I mean anecdotal, but as someone who lives around the area, I think that city actually might be the opposite, underrated as hell and one of the best in America. Plus with Pilsen, Goose Island, and the Indiana-Chicagoland area getting insanely richer and nicer, not to mention the whole north side, I feel that city, aside from some south side neighborhoods, obviously, are just getting better and better. Was in Chicago 2 months ago. Chicago, not nearly as bad as everyone makes it out to be. Had a really great time. Seattle, once the only city I wanted to move to in the USA. Everyone talks about Chicago like it's a war zone. I lived there for 8 years and I still commute into the city from the burbs for work. I have never once felt in danger. The real answer is hundreds of medium-sized towns with no economic anchors scattered across the US that have been slowly suffocating and withering away since March 2020. The opioid epidemic and political conspiracy theories have absolutely ravaged the American middle class. Since March 2020, as someone from the Rust Belt, let me tell you, it's been far longer than that. I'd say it's been a slow but steady decline since the late 70s and early 80s, as industry left and nothing replaced it. The stretch I just drove between Lower Nye and Upper Pa shocked me. Everyone talks about Chicago like it's a war zone. I lived there for 8 years and I still commute into the city from the burbs for work. I have never once felt in danger. The city I live in, every answer on here. I live in Detroit and it actually looks a lot better than 5 years ago. I went from East Coast Ma to Upper Nye for my daughter's graduation. We stopped a few towns on the way up for gas and a bathroom break. Holy shit, what happened up there? It's like Deliverance in some towns and third world countries, with burned out houses and cars in the streets in others. It was not like this when we sent her there 2019, right before the pandemic. Portland, many amazing restaurants closed. The rollout of drug decriminalization was an absolute clusterfuck. I'm fine with drug use, but I think it needs to be responsible when it spills onto innocent bystanders. The behavior needs to be nipped in the bud. Instead, it festers in Portland. The government instead decided to enable addicts, letting people smoke hard drugs on buses and on public sidewalks. I don't want to get your second-hand fentanyl smoke. In the name of harm reduction, boofing pamphlets and straws were given out, despite straw restrictions for restaurants. Small businesses were repeatedly vandalized and windows were smashed. This caused a lot of cool places to close and makes it less appealing to go to the current one. Neighborhoods have random strangers, busted ARVs roll in, and set up camp with their shit spilling into the road, creating dangerous situations. These people are defecating in bushes and littering everywhere. Some are meth labs. Car and bicycle theft and vandalism has significantly increased. The police hardly do anything. Spontaneous stops into a store, carrying reusable bags, and multi-store trips have all but ended because I don't want my car getting broken into again. So instead of local stores getting my money, I order online. Large efforts to make public transportation more viable, but little to no effort is made to protect passengers and drivers from mentally ill or people on drugs. Roads have been redesigned to take away car lanes and add bike lanes, but bike chop shops are common and allowed to accumulate in plain sight. I'm not going to ride somewhere and risk being stranded so an addict can get his next hit. The perspective on the social construct is all one way if you are a drug addict. But if you are trying to make ends meet in the working or middle classes, very little is done to improve your life, with excessive regulations making things slower and more expensive. I saw a Tyler Oliveira video about the situation in Portland, and there was a good point made by someone in the video about the drug decriminalization. Essentially, they were going off the European model, which greatly reduced drug use, but they forgot to add the step where they created government resources to dissuade drug use. With how the law was currently passed, it basically is just encouraging drug use at this point. Yea, in Europe, generally, if you smoke crack on the bus or harass people while high, the cops will first arrest you. Then you get a choice of rehab or jail. If you do it in the privacy of your own home, then rehab and other resources are still available and pushed on you. Dealing hard drugs is also still illegal, and dealers are punished. I agree with Portland too. Visited for the first time recently and was shocked at how messed up it was and how it didn't match up the stories I'd heard about it. My friends who had visited Portland several times before COVID and came with me were all flabbergasted at what a terrible state it was in. I love America. I travel there several times a year, have done for 30 years. All I can say is what is happening in downtown San Francisco, Seattle and Los Angeles is truly concerning, but for sheer rate of change over 5 years, I think Portland would have to be a contender. Portland homeless rate increased 50% since 2019. Was reading about it today. How do they even calculate homeless populations anyways? Does some guy just drive around with a little clicker? Seriously, how is this determined low? There is an annual point in time count that it requires at the end of January. Shelters and other locations perform their count, and at the same time, the number of people sleeping outside are counted to avoid double counting. It's not perfect, but it is coordinated at the state and local levels, well, at least from what I have seen. Yes, they mark them with some white paint, and then if they're still there 2 hours later, they're counted as homeless. The really Asian places are lesser known to non-natives. Town is real. But there is also tons of Koreans in Sef, Granada Hills area, and Shrevi, Saugus, and Valencia. Chinatown is not where most Chinese stuff are. Think Shviv instead, Alhambra, Monterey Park, etc. Little Tokyo is pretty Japanese. Sawtelle is another, now called Little Osaka. From the Japanese and Japanese Americans I know in Los Angeles, they tend to be less concentrated into a few cities in La and more spread out. None of the aforementioned places are remotely close to dangerous. Almost everywhere is pretty safe in La, minus a few blocks downtown and portions of cities in Central Eastern. Hell, I've been to dangerous parts of Compton at night and people there are just confused they saw someone they didn't know. You probably know La is a sprawl by word of mouth. You are still not getting how sprawled out La is. You think you know, but if reading this, have you thinking La is dangerous? You don't know. I second San Francisco. It's always had a homeless blight patch for the years that I lived there, but over the last 5 years it's expanded dramatically in size and intensity. It's now probably a solid 2 miles across, and even the normally imposing barrier of the hills around it are being less effective than before, plus the utterly brazen degree of theft. The people who still pay for things Walgreens ought to feel like rubes. Edit. Literally scroll down 1 page to find this. Dead body found in duffel bag in Golden Gate Park. Having lived in Pay and Foul, and I expected more Miamis and Daytonas and Philadelphias, but apparently the West Coast really sucks. Ha! From an outsider's view, Philly went from kinder alright to things aren't looking great. From an insider's view, life hasn't changed all that much beyond having to listen to your suburban rural family, who wouldn't step foot in Philadelphia at its best, tell you that it's a post-apocalyptic hellscape despite the fact that they haven't been in its boundaries in 15 years. Wawa has abandoned us, and lots of stores are still set up in the consumer-unfriendly COVID layouts, and there's less people walking around during work lunchtime. That's about how much it's fallen. Crime is up, but the worst of it is still murders between people who have beef with each other, so while they are up, you'll know if you have a higher chance of being murdered. If you're just a regular person not involved in unsavory things, you're just as safe as before. The biggest problem is that the police got super buttered when the nation started to push back against them killing and maiming innocent people, so they have stopped protecting anyone or arresting someone if their crime wasn't murder. And it's not helping their cause because we are a huge hospital medical city and many of us work in the industry and we all stepped up and put our bodies on the line while being attacked by brainwashed people, yet never even thought about letting people die. The police got their feelings hurt because people want the same accountability and integrity everyone else lives by, and now they've stopped doing their sworn duty and are letting innocent people die because of politics. Dr. Philly isn't nearly as bad as everyone thinks it is, and it wasn't a high-class town to begin with. What's happening to Lofi? I haven't been there since 2019. I'm highly considering moving to Portland, and this post was scaring me. Visited early this summer and absolutely loved it. It looked like it had some bad pockets, but nothing crazy. It's totally dependent on what your standard is. If you lived in Portland 5-10 years ago, you'd be appalled at what is now. San Francisco. I just saw yesterday where they were able to do a meta-study of local activity based on cell phone network data usage. Whereas cities like New York City and Chicago have mostly recovered, downtown San Francisco is still barely above COVID lockdown level. The problem of fallen cities isn't caused by the poor, the homeless, the addicted. Look back 20-30 years with an honest eye. I'll use Seattle for an example, since I live in the area and lived in the city 30 years. I came to Seattle in 1988. I was a homeless street kid. I had a friend who moved there who let me sleep in their dining room when our paths crossed. Otherwise, I just hung out with friends, ate a teen feed, and scrounged enough change to get tobacco and some coffee at the last exit. Drugs were plentiful, frequently free or dirt cheap. Food was not difficult to come by. Work was easy to get, and you could get a job, save your money up for a couple of checks, and find an easygoing landlord who's rent you a studio for $300 a month, all utilities paid. I lived in the same cheap, divey apartment building for 10 years that was all double studios with kitchens. The bathrooms were down the hall, the carpets were paper thin, and the roaches were an ongoing struggle. But you could get by on $10 of folding money in your pocket. In 1998, by the time I moved, gentrification was still an abstract concept, but it was coming. People started buying up the old crack houses in the Central District and turning them either into cute little bungalows or raising them and building the first generation of townhouses and condos, precursors to the ugly boxes of mixed-use retail below, housing above we have now. That building I lived in. They built the world's tiniest functional bathrooms in the closets, and now they rent for $3,000 or more a month. Minimum wage was always tight, but now you need to be making nearly $30 an hour just to comfortably live. So, what happened? Unfettered corporate greed and developers deciding that tearing down the affordable housing to put up condos. Suddenly, you had people moving to Georgetown, South Beacon Hill, West Seattle, places that were cheaper but still in the city. Time passes, you start seeing the developers turning their eyes to those areas, and the cycle repeats. I'm a cook for the University of Washington. I work for the state. It used to be the best paying cooking job in Seattle, and benefits that are very nice. I had to move from Seattle to Bremerton because I got priced out of Balaton, and now you need to be making Seattle money to live in Bremerton. Everything is more expensive. The money is pooled in the hands of the upper class, and the poor and working class suffer for it. People live in their cars and campers and tents because the other people with the money don't want to share. People turn to drugs, and when they become addicted, they turn to crime to keep their heads above water. The justice system is a mug's game. Police only show up for violent crimes. Nobody seems to care about the people that used to get by who don't anymore. I'm tired, and it's nearly 2 a.m, and now this missive will bring out the keyboard warriors who will pick apart my words and tell me I'm stupid or old, or if I don't like it, just move. I did move. No one who works for the state should have to have 2 jobs. No one should not be able to buy a house and be forced to either pay double my mortgage in rent or live in their car. We need to stop these people who only see things in terms of how much money they can make. I'm tired. I'm gonna go to bed. This feels like an incomplete piece of writing from me. Have at it. Damn, I moved to Portland 3 months ago and have thought it's been amazing, safe, and super lively. However, after reading this thread, I will now barricade myself in my house and just watch the news and read Reddit to get the story of what it's really like in Portland. Detroit is looking better than it has in decades. Portland, or is like Gotham City now. Edit. I will elaborate. I lived there for 15 years and witnessed the collapse of the city. When I moved there, it was awesome. Little to no traffic, great food, affordable rent, eclectic culture. Then keep Portland, weird happened, and the influx of weirdos and hipsters bulked up. which was fine but made it way more crowded. Then real estate investors came in and started gentrifying everything while also building luxury high-rises. So all of us, including the weirdos and hipsters, couldn't afford to live in our city anymore. So we either moved out of the city or took to the streets. Then fentanyl and COVID happened, so even more people were on the streets and in dire straits. Then all of the protests, like Blem, were made violent by the paid but portrayed on the news as the city's inhabitants were just going nuts, which was not true. I luckily got out of there before they decriminalized everything. But I still have friends who live there. BC, they can't afford to move B, it's so expensive to live there, and they send me pics and updates. It's horrible. It was such a cool city. Edit each. I am not a conservative. I am all for harm reduction and helping the homeless. I was homeless at one point in my life, so I know what that feels like. However, with all of these things mentioned above combined, the crime, trash, illnesses, untreated illnesses, and overall homeostasis of the city is at 0%. I do not see it recovering. Lol. No, you have to understand that Portland is mentioned so much because of the rate of its declension. When I moved out of Oregon in 2021, it was 50x worse than what it had been when I moved there. Not saying it's a bad city, just had a terrible fall.